Welcome to part 1 of the Godot BootCamp lesson on combining brainCloud requests via Cloud Code script. This is the first of a two-part lesson that will use a post-hook Cloud Code script to combine all the requests that the example game makes on a successful authentication request. Run the game. Once authenticated, close the window. Drag open the console tab. Notice all the requests that are made after the reconnect request. As mentioned, we can eliminate these requests by writing a post-hook script that gets executed on an authentication request. In that script, we would then make the same request that the example game is doing and format the data from these requests and return it all in the authentication response. In fact, by moving this logic into a Cloud Code script, it will save you API calls. When using a Cloud Code script, you get 2 free API calls automatically. Subsequent API calls after the 2 free calls only cost half an API call. It should be noted that the Cloud Code script itself has a cost of 1 API call, and so does the authentication request. Navigate to Visual Studio Code. In the game's onAuthenticationRequestCompleted method, we can see that there's 7 requests that we need to make in the post-hook script. Open your web browser and navigate to the brainCloud design portal. In the Cloud Code API Explorer, authenticate. Take note of the data that's included in the response. By the end of this lesson, all the data that the example game requires will be returned on a successful authentication response. On the left, click Scripts. Click the plus button to create a new script. Name the script Authentication Post Hook. Ensure the box for client callable is unchecked. Delete the initial parameters and leave them blank. Click Create. Remove the starting script. Declare a pair of constants to represent the 2 leaderboard IDs, main and daily. Get the leaderboard and gamification service proxies. Set up the response object and be sure to include the original data's message. Make the brainCloud get global leaderboard page request, passing in the main leaderboard ID constant, the sort order, and the index range as the arguments. If the response was successful, assign the main leaderboard data to the response object. Next, make another brainCloud get leaderboard page request, passing in the daily leaderboard ID constant, the sort order, and the index range as the arguments. If that request was successful, assign the daily leaderboard data to the response object. Finally, make the brainCloud read achievements request, passing in true to request the metadata. If the request was successful, assign the achievements array to the response object. Save the script. Under Cloud Code, click API Hooks. Click New API Hook. Set the service to authenticate. Set the hook type to post. Ensure that the selected script is the authentication post hook script that we just wrote. Delete the parameter, then click Save. On the left, click Scripts. On the right, click the Debug button. Then click Quick Auth. Scroll through the response and notice that the main leaderboard, the daily leaderboard, and the achievements data were included in the response. However, a lot of data is being included that we don't need in the example game. We could easily parse and then format the response data in the Cloud Code script to only include the data that we need in our example game. On the left, click the Explorer tab. Then click Edit. Remove the main leaderboard response data. Instead, parse and set the leaderboard ID. Then create an array for the main leaderboard entries. Get the array of the leaderboard entries from the main leaderboard response object. Loop through the leaderboard entries and parse each entry's score, rank, and data properties. Assign them to the corresponding property in the response object. We're going to do the same thing for the daily leaderboard. Remove the daily leaderboard response data. Instead, parse and set the leaderboard ID value. Then create an array for the daily leaderboard entries. Get the array for the leaderboard entries from the daily leaderboard response object. Loop through the leaderboard entries and parse each entry's score, rank, and data properties. Assign them to the corresponding property in the response object. Once you're done that, remove the achievements response data and create an array instead. Loop through each achievement object and parse the ID, description, title, and status. Assign them to the corresponding property in the response object. Save the script, then click Debug. Click Quick Auth. Scroll through the response data and notice that the leaderboards and the achievements only include the data that the example game needs. On the left, click the Explorer tab. Scroll to the top of the script. At the top of the script, declare several more constants for the global entity, the user entity, and the custom entity data. Then, get the global entity, custom entity, user entity, and identity service proxies. Scroll to the bottom of the script. Make the brainCloud getList by indexed ID request, pass in the level indexed ID constant and the number of entities to return as the arguments. If the response was successful, create a level data object in the response data. Then create the entity list array, and then parse the level count and assign the values to the level data response object. Loop through all the elements in the entities array and parse the entity type, entity ID, the level index, and the level data, and assign the values to the level data response object. Save the script, then click Debug. Click the trash can to clear the log. Click Quick Auth. Notice that the global entity level data is now included and formatted to only include the data that the example game needs. On the left, click the Explorer tab. Make the brainCloud getEntities by type request. Pass in the user progress entity type constant as the argument. If the response was successful, we're going to check to see if the entities array actually contained any elements. If there aren't any elements, that means we need to make the create entity request like we do in the example game, thus eliminating another brainCloud request that the example app has to make. If the create entity response was successful, create a user progress object in the response data. Then parse the entity ID, entity type, and the data's version. Assign the values to the user progress response object. Notice that we are assigning the user progress default data constant to the user progress data property. This way the example app can just parse the data, regardless if it was just created or if it previously existed. If there was a user entity that did exist, instead we'll create a user progress object in the response data, then we'll parse the entity ID, the entity type, the data's version, and the data itself. Assign the values to the user progress response object. Save the script, then click Debug. Click Quick Auth. Notice that the response data now includes the user entity data. On the left, click the Explorer tab. Make the brainCloud getEntity page request. Pass in the country leaderboard entity type and the entity context constants as the arguments. If the response was successful, create a country leaderboard object in the leaderboard's response data. We're going to parse the custom entity data and format the response to look like an actual leaderboard object. Get the custom entity items array. Loop through all the entities in the array. Parse the entity data's score and country code, and assign the values to the corresponding leaderboard object. Since the custom entities are sorted, we can then use the for loop's index value to set the leaderboard's rank. Save the script, then click Debug. Click Quick Auth. Scroll through the response data and notice the country leaderboard's data is properly formatted just like the other two leaderboards. That means in the example game, we can simply parse the country leaderboard like a regular leaderboard. On the left, click the Explorer tab. Make the brainCloud getIdentities request. If the response was successful, assign the identities array to the response data. Save the script, then click Debug. Click Quick Auth. And notice the authenticated identities data is now included. If we were to authenticate in the example game, all this extra data would then be returned as part of the authentication response. However, the example game's code is not set up to parse all this data yet. That's exactly what we'll be doing in the next lesson. Part 2 of combining brainCloud requests via Cloud Code Script is the next lesson in the Godot BootCamp.